Hola, welcome to Cultura Convos, a space for stories and reflections of identidad y cultura. So, through personal reflections, conversations, and stories with other guests, this community is about embracing our cultura and all other parts of our identity because there's no one thing that defines us. And ultimately, I want us to write and rewrite our story from a place of strength so that we can become the best version of ourselves because I have experience and I know that this will be an ongoing journey, right? It's a lifelong thing. So as we learn together, grow together, I am really, really excited for what's to come with this space. So thank you for being here today. My name is Edith. You can also call me Edith. And I am many things right now, your host for Cultura Combos. I'm also a newish mother, I guess you could still say, 18 months, and the author of my first children's book, Two Homes, Dos Casas, which we've celebrated this year, the first year anniversary. And I'm really excited because it's also a book about celebrating our cultura, being proud of our story, and really celebrating the different places we call home. So, thank you so much for being here. I decided that we're going to wrap up season 1 with episode 9, and I'm going to start with sharing the birthing class that changed everything for me. So, one thing I've noticed is just in my own story is like, yes, there was so much I would hear about pregnancy and like motherhood growing up, but it was really like it was almost like the same stories over and over again, because like my circles were small and like the women that I referenced were like a few, right? So once I started my own journey, I realized like, wow, there's just so much that we don't know. And I had a birthing class that literally changed everything for me to the point that I literally walked away like not only changing my whole plan, but also like, dang, I think I would have had kids sooner by taking this class sooner. So I'm going to share today parts of that story. So if you haven't already, hit subscribe. If you've liked what you've heard, if you feel like, oh, I need to share this with somebody in the middle of this, please do. And thank you once again, and let's dive in. So think about it. What is the first thing that comes to your mind when I say giving birth? Like, actually think about it for a moment. So for me, it was a novela scene. Literally a scene where you have like a bunch of doctors in a room. There's like the protagonista de novela, right? Like sweaty, in pain, in the doctor, this thing around her head, and she's like yelling. And it's like, her legs are already wide open, and she's probably like either holding like both hands in the cama or like grabbing onto her, esposo, amante, whatever it is in the novela. And like super dramatic and just like, gritando y puchando and like everything, right? So for me, I had that image in my head really vividly because this was the question that the teacher asked in the class that I took. So I was only about 8 weeks pregnant, and I had just found out I was pregnant a few weeks before that. And, me like, me puse las pilas because I was like, okay, I don't really know anything about pregnancy or giving birth. Like I said in episode 2, like going from quote unquote, not a kid's person to then having a baby, like my education around giving birth or pregnancy was mainly like my mom saying like, no te embaraces. And then when the teacher asked this question, realizing all the novelas that were in my head. And yeah, so for me, I was like, you know what? I need to take a class. And I didn't go in with much expectation into this class other than need to learn something. And I also saw that it was a couples class. So I thought, like, oh, this is perfect. And the class was called Fundamentals of Empowered Birth. And what I thought would be a class of like pregnancy and maybe tips on giving birth was like a whole different vibe. It was one of like mental shifts of rewriting our story and rewriting parts of what we knew and fears around pregnancy and giving birth. So it was broken down into 3 parts. The facilitator had like, kind of the mindset, which is part of why that was her opening question. We then dived into like the actual kind of science and the development of the baby, all that. And then ultimately, the last part of the class was like advocacy, different birthing positions, and things of that sort. And for me, the first part, which was like starting with the mindset, and then the latter part, which was like learning advocacy around like your experience and ways you can advocate for yourself and voice your needs during the process. Those were the two that were like most that I remember the most and most impactful, which is what I want to focus on today for today's episode. So there were about 8 couples in the room. So we were in this like, you know, it was like a mini gym, like one of those like kind of like boutique gym style. And like a yoga-ish room with some weights and some yoga stuff. And we were kind of like all in a semicircle with our partners. And when the teacher posed this question about what comes to mind, there were other people that, obviously voiced theirs. And many people said similar things like, oh, movies or like the story of a friend or, stories I heard of my mom and all that. And she basically let us know that, we were not alone and emphasized that so much of what we know about birthing, about giving birth, does come from movies and from television shows. And, often, obviously, these are a dramatized version in a lot of ways. Her second question was around our fears. She, asked us to shout out like what fears we had. And, one of the fears that I shared was tearing. Like I was not so much the tearing part because obviously pushing a baby out, like it made sense for me. Like women can tear. It was more the stitching part. I had heard stories of women say that when they were stitched, they literally felt like the process, the anesthesia hadn't kicked in. And for me, that was like super scary. Just the thought of it, imagining that, I was like, no, like that's one thing that definitely, definitely scared me. And then I was scared of the actual birth. Like for me, it always has been wild to think like a baby came out of someone's like vagina, like someone pushed the baby out. That was always like, whoa, like it's just wild to me. And then I also didn't like hospitals. Like, when I started thinking more and more, I'm like, well, it makes sense. Like every experience I've had at a hospital and the memories I have of hospitals are when someone I loved was, going through a challenging time. Like, I thought about my dad when I was in high school. He got his first stroke, and I was like, it was just a really challenging time. And, for me now, like just to think of the having to wear that like robe or like grayish, bluish robe thing and being in a hospital overnight, like I don't know, there's just something about the hospital that I just didn't really like at all. So that was something else that I shared. And then other people also shouted out theirs. Like there was people that were scared of like pregnancy itself and all the symptoms that they were having. Some people shared like, being scared about death, like the baby or the umbilical cord, kind of like, going around the baby and all these different things. So she went around the room and one by one, she started like kind of acknowledging what each of us had said and then also sharing more information and knowledge about each of those. So like for me, she talked about how yes, it was common for women to tear. At the same time, let me know how as we talked more about ways to advocate for ourselves, that was one of the ways. Like if I was in a situation where I was getting stitched up and it hurt, like I could voice that, having people around us to support us in that advocacy. She also talked about the umbilical cord and how, uh, it's not necessarily uncommon for kids to get the babies to have the umbilical wrapped around them. It doesn't necessarily always lead to death. Like it's usually if it's like pinched, it could lead to less oxygen like flowing to them. However, she went, into more details of like it doesn't always mean, oh, it's wrapped, therefore the baby, will die, pass away, etc. So she went into really just understanding more about each of the things that we feared, like actually learning more knowledge and gaining more data and the reality of it, right? And a lot of it, we realized sometimes there was elements of things that we may had perceived as true that were necessarily not true, right? And even something like for me around the robe, she's like, Edith, like, you don't have to wear that robe. Like, if it's around the robe and, just what you're wearing doesn't make you feel comfortable, like, there's actually other things you can wear. And apparently, there's like online, there's like outfits and stuff like that. I don't know, like whole outfits, but like other things you can wear during your birth that can also be comfortable, and you don't have to necessarily wear the one that they offer at the hospital. So things like that that seemed little but made like a really big difference. And then at some point, she asked us to take a moment and think that since the beginning of human existence, women have been giving birth. And you know, whether you're in like a soccer stadium or, watching a game or in a concert, like walking in the street, just looking around and every single person you're looking at, there was a woman that gave birth to them, and that image was also very powerful, like reminding ourselves we have so many women behind us that have done this. And it was just something that gave me a lot of, yeah, a lot of like power and like, I can do this, right? And all of these images and fears were really a result of a movie, a TV show, a novela, a story we had heard, and, something we heard or saw. And one by one in our head, it was like thinking differently, asking ourselves different questions, and then just learning the facts and also putting more trust in our bodies, which was like a big theme of that day too. And for the first time, I was actually pretty excited to be pregnant. And it's not that I wasn't, happy before per se. It's just that, like I said, I was only about 8 weeks at this time. Most of the women and couples in that room, like they were closer to giving birth. Um, and so yeah, it's not that I wasn't happy, but I do remember like sharing the news with my parents right away and, with my sister, my siblings, and it's like everybody was way more excited than me. Like, you know, their reaction was just, really, really excited. I was more like emotional and like teared up, like, wow, this is happening. And then theirs was just like excitement. So at some point, like, I literally hired a therapist, like, right away. Like, that week, I hired a therapist, so I was like, "This is a big life change." Yes, I, said I was open to this, and now it's happening, and I'm like, "Okay, I need help." And she was really helpful, and at one point, I did tell her, "I don't know, I feel kinda guilty because it's like people are asking me, like, 'How do you feel?' And they're, like, super excited, and I don't wanna, like, lie, like, I don't feel like, I just don't know that I feel like the energy that they're giving me, you know?" And she explained to me like, "It's fine, like you could still be processing. So you don't have to lie. You can just say, "You know what? I'm I'm happy and I'm still processing," or "I'm trying to figure out how I feel. Like I'm still processing. Like this is normal, right?" And my sister too at one point was like, he did like, "It's different for you, like, you're the one that's going through it, you're the one that just found out." Like, I'm excited because 'cause I'm gonna be an aunt, like, I'm gonna be a tia, like, my parents are gonna have another grandchild, like, our perspective is, like, very different than what you're going through, and yeah, she was right. Overall, so this was like really early in my pregnancy, but overall, I had a very smooth and easy pregnancy. Like, I didn't have any complications. I did have some weird symptoms that, like, I never heard about, like a lot of saliva at some point, like literally spitting saliva, inner thigh pain. Like, but in terms of the overall, like 9 months, like, I had a very smooth pregnancy. Initially, I couldn't work out. I was like, I had nausea all day, and I wouldn't throw up, which in some ways I felt was, I don't know, I don't wanna say it's worse than throwing up because throwing up sucks, but I I never threw up because of the nausea, I just felt like I wanted to. So I would say for me, the first months were the hardest because everything was changing. Like, I already feel like I eat pretty healthy, but the added pressure of, like, a baby was, like, a whole 'nother level, like, I'll wanna eat my hot Cheetos here and there, and it was just kinda like, ugh, like, now you gotta overthink it. I love coffee. So, things like that. I was the most consistent with my gym at the time. And now all of a sudden, like I'm feeling nauseous all day. So I would say the first few months for me were the hardest. However, I did have this therapist that really helped me process through it. And then it got so much easier for me. It was just those initial months. And, every story is different. For me, mine, at some point, I did tell my therapist, like, I was feeling guilty. I remember I went to the gym. I did, like stretches and things like that, things I could still do, which apparently also could help with the nausea. And I said, I feel kind of bad because, like, I don't wanna feel like I'm complaining about, like, everything that's changing and how I'm feeling because I'm really grateful that I have, like, a tiny something in me, but at the same time, I feel like this sucks, basically, and, like, I literally started crying in the middle of the session, and it was one of those where it's like, "How do you feel?" And you think you feel great, and all of a sudden that question triggers how you really feel, and it's just like, start bawling and stuff. And I explained what I just said, and she's like, it you know, why do you feel like expressing your discomfort is complaining?" And in that moment, it took me back to a lot of times when I would be in funerals or again go to hospitals, and I realized how many funerals and hospitals I had been to because, my parents are from this rancho in Mexico. And, when it comes to a lot of things, there is a lot of unity, right? Which is beautiful in a lot of ways. So being a kid, whether someone passed away in Mexico or in the US, we would still visit the family. And, sometimes we would go to hospitals and all that. So I would hear things like, ay, pues, es, I don't know, I'm making an example like, ay, no, mi mamá nunca se quejó. Sufrió tanto, pero nunca se quejó. And I realized for me, it's almost like I felt guilty because I felt like by complaining, I was also complaining about the baby. And, it was almost like I had heard a lot of praise around not necessarily complaining. In that moment, she like helped me process that. And I was like, you know what? Expressing discomfort is fine. Like sometimes we need to express that. And then two things can coexist, right? Like I can feel discomfort in this and say, hey, this part of pregnancy sucks. And I'm still happy I'm pregnant. I'm happy I'm going to have a baby. But I'm also scared and I'm also like trying to process. And, all these things are existing at the same time, and that's completely fine. So because of that, I was very early into my pregnancy, and now here I was on a Saturday taking this all-day workshop with Marcel, and yeah, for the first time, I felt like, wow, like, I'm actually getting excited for this, like, this is great. And then the last part of class included preparing for birth. This is the moment that, like, truly changed everything for me. Many of you may have heard me talk about my first children's book, Two Homes, Dos Casas, and Dos Casas. And you can purchase it at edithsuarez.com/books. I wanted write something that would speak to children because I thought, wow, as much as I love listening to stories of people, of adults, how amazing that we can literally change lives by having kids become proud of who they are, where they come from, their stories since a young age. So I am really, really proud of this book. And my goal and my vision is not just the story that I wrote, but really the stories that are going to happen between families when you finish reading the book to be able to tell part of your story. So, this book is available as a bilingual version, so primarily English with sprinkles of Spanish throughout. And then this one is fully in Spanish, and they're both available on my website at edithsuarez.com. And then the last part of class included preparing for birth. This is the moment that like truly changed everything for me in the sense that, we were going around the room and talking about what hospitals or like where we were going to give birth, right? And at this point, I hadn't chosen a hospital yet. Like, I had started doing research, calling some hospitals. Like, I had gone to a hospital to confirm that, like, my 99 cents Family Dollar, pregnancy test was accurate, which it was, but I hadn't yet confirmed a hospital, and I had called a few hospitals, but I mainly knew about, like, 2 because in Atlanta, it's like there's this interesting thing where if you were born and raised here, like, people ask you, like, "Are you a Northside baby? Are you a Grady baby?" And it's like, these are, like, the 2 big hospitals, and for me, I was like, of course, I'm neither one of those, but I also wasn't necessarily sure yet, like, what hospital I was going to choose. I did really heavily lean into wanting a woman of color because one thing I had learned, several years before, I remember watching this documentary that day was around like Black women and infant mortality rates. And it was all about how there's like these huge disparities between Black women who die at birth and then Black women who give birth to infants that have like a stillbirth or like die shortly after their birth. And I never forgot that. And I was looking at the statistics before this episode to confirm. And yeah, so for like Black women, it's like over 2 times higher than like white women per se. And then like they go based on like the census category. So it was like Alaska Native and American Indian was also like really high. And I remembered I had learned a bit about this with this documentary. And I remember, listening to stories where women talked about like, voicing things to the doctors and then not being believed or the doctors not responding in a way that, yeah, like showed trust in what they were saying as like, you know, women that understood their bodies or shared symptoms, etc. So I had remembered this. So, it all kind of came back at that time when I was doing the search. And I was like, I really want like a woman of color. Like I was specifically thinking like a Black woman too. I'm in Atlanta. So, there's a lot of Black professionals in like different industries in the city. So I was like, this was like important to me. And I was like, I'm gonna talk to a few. I didn't want to just like, oh, it's Black women, that's it. Like I wanted to talk to a few. So I knew that, but that really was about it. So when we went around, like everybody was like sharing their plans and I learned a lot about my options. I guess I was kind of just thinking of a hospital even though that just didn't really feel right for me since the beginning. And a woman shared, like the hospital she was going. There was like multiple hospitals. I also learned there was like birth centers, which is a little bit of it could be a little bit of a hybrid depending on the type of birth center. So a couple was doing that. And then there was one woman, or I should say one couple, where they had decided to have a home birth. And she went a little bit into why she wanted the home birth. And she herself was in the process of becoming a doula. So I didn't even know what a doula was at the time, but a doula is essentially like someone who is the midwife or the nurses, the OB/GYN, they're primarily for the baby, right? It's like getting the baby healthy. Doula is like helping you in the process of pregnancy. So like throughout the whole thing, all the way to delivery, like your mental health, taking care of you, your partner. So she was in the process of becoming a doula, talked about why she chose a home birth, and at some point mentioned that the home birth was like going to be way cheaper than like if she gave birth at a hospital. And I remember thinking like, what? I don't know. I always just assume like if you have a home birth, like it it was just, like, a lot pricier. That's what I just thought. I clearly didn't really have a lot of details. Just what I thought. And, when she said that, it kinda, like, caught my attention. And then, as we were diving in a little bit into, like, the birthing, this section, the teacher was just like sharing different statistics, and we talked about like different tools for advocacy and just like knowing numbers and knowing like the data and stuff around certain things. And one of the things we talked about was C-section. And for me, I also knew I wanted a, like, vaginal birth. Like, if I could have, like, a natural birth, that was important to me because I don't know, I've always, like, tripped out about all these, like, medications and things like that, and I was like, "If I don't have to deal with that, I know that obviously there's emergencies, obviously there's exceptions, there's a reason why, like, science could be really powerful," so I definitely believe in that. But just with my birthing, I was like, "I really want a vaginal birth," like, that's another thing I knew. And when the teacher started talking about C-sections, growing up, I would hear my mom talk about, like, no, pues aquí los doctores luego, luego te quieren sacar. Aquí no te esperan. Aquí rápido, 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 rápido. So I had kind of these, again, a lot of these thoughts were surfacing during these classes, right? So I was like, or this class, and I was like, so I had kind of that in my head, and I think that's part of why I wanted a vaginal birth, and I knew that my mom had had her kids, like natural and stuff, and so when she started talking about C-sections, she started talking about how, like, the rate of C-sections had gone up significantly over the years. And when I was looking up the exact data as I was planning for this episode, I was reading how, like, from 1990 to, like, a couple years ago, because it was in, like, 2025 per se, it had gone, like, up from 7% to, like, 21% globally. And then in the US specifically, I was also reading how, and this goes like further back, but like since 1965, where it was around 4.5%, now we're like over 30%. So like one in three births. And so she basically talked about that increase. And there's a lot of information out there. Financing and like money is definitely one of the factors. Is not the only one, but it's definitely one because C-sections are a lot faster and they can get through more people and they're like quicker, right? The thing is that, unless it's one that's really necessary, they are still like more dangerous than having a normal birth. And this goes back to like our bodies and trusting our bodies and the power of our bodies. Again, there's exceptions, but in general, they are more dangerous. And one thing she mentioned that was really like, oh, wow, it's like if you think of OBGYNs, they're surgeons, right? OBGYNs are surgeons. That's what they go to school for. That is their trade. And that's like their training, I should say. And, that like ultimately having a C-section is a surgery and it's a very, yes, it's quick, but it doesn't mean that it's not, still a surgery and something that's very critical. And, when we think of like midwives, and there's like this whole history of like midwives being in the hospitals and being removed, and, there's a lot of information out there about that. And, and I'll talk more about a little bit about midwives in the next episode, but just my experience. But ultimately, what I wanted to emphasize with this is that ultimately, midwives are many times women that go into this field because they are passionate about it. They care about this. They care about, caring for women. They care about moms and their children versus, I want to be a surgeon and then maybe I end up becoming a OBGYN that works with women in birth, as opposed to like other parts of the field. And not to say none of them care, but it is a little bit different, And so the more I thought about it, the more I sat in this class and was just like absorbing all this knowledge, asking questions, like the more clear it became that the hospital didn't necessarily feel like the right place for me to give birth for like the birthing part. And here I was, I thought I was like walking into this class where I was going to learn a little bit more about pregnancy, a little bit about more about birth. And in the end, I was literally walking away with like a whole different perspective, with more questions, with more knowledge. And what I decided to do is talk to the woman who had talked about home births. And, I said, can we talk? We exchanged numbers. And then after talking to her, I realized that that's what I wanted. A lot of what she said had resonated with me. It was like a very easy decision after that. And that's when everything changed for us. And we were like, okay, we're going to plan a home birth. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for your time today and for spending it with me. I really, really appreciate you, whether you were in the car, whether you were at home, cleaning, at the gym, wherever you are. I am so grateful for you. And if you enjoyed the episode, if you know there's somebody else that you would like to share with, please do and hit subscribe too, because all these things are really helpful. A subscribe, a like, a rating, especially as we continue to grow, so that I can make sure that I can continue to be intentional and then just, maintain the platform as we grow and move forward. So I really appreciate you. I wish you the best, and I will be back in the new year with the new episode. Thank you.